6 months after returning from Bangkok, Marcus stood in his Los Angeles training facility, watching his reflection in the mirror-lined walls. The space looked exactly as he had left it, state-of-the-art equipment, championship trophies displayed prominently, and motivational posters featuring his own image in victory poses. But everything felt different. The young man facing him across the sparring mat was Jake Morrison, a rising amateur champion who had specifically sought out Marcus for training. Jake represented exactly the type of student that Marcus used to love teaching. Aggressive, technically proficient, and absolutely convinced that superior fighting ability was the solution to all martial arts challenges. 6 months ago, Marcus would have met Jake's intensity with equal force, demonstrating dominance through superior technique and overwhelming pressure. Today, he found himself applying principles that Somchai had taught him about understanding motivation before engaging in conflict. "Show me your best combination," Marcus instructed, settling into a neutral stance that he had never used before Bangkok. Jake launched into an impressive sequence that showcased his considerable abilities, a feinted jab followed by a powerful cross, then a low kick to high kick combination that demonstrated excellent flexibility and timing. The techniques were tournament quality, executed with the kind of athletic precision that won competitions. Marcus avoided the entire combination using minimal movement and positioning that created opportunities for devastating counters. But instead of following through with techniques that would have overwhelmed Jake, Marcus paused the sparring. "Good technique," Marcus said honestly. "But tell me, what were you trying to achieve with that combination?" Jake looked confused by the question. "Trying to hit you, obviously. Land clean strikes, overwhelm your defense." "But why do you want to overwhelm my defense? What happens after you achieve that goal?" The question clearly frustrated Jake, who had come to train with a champion, not engage in philosophical discussions. "I prove that I'm good enough to train at this level. Show you that I can handle advanced instruction." Marcus nodded, recognizing his own former mindset in Jake's response. "So fighting me successfully would validate your training and give you access to better instruction. Is that the only way to achieve those goals?" Instead of answering, Marcus began demonstrating some of the principles that Somchai had taught him. He showed Jake how the combination could be executed more effectively by eliminating telegraphing movements. He explained how different tactical objectives required different technical approaches. Most importantly, he helped Jake understand how his need to prove himself was actually limiting his ability to learn. "When your primary goal is demonstrating superiority," Marcus explained, "you choose techniques that showcase your existing abilities rather than techniques that are most effective for the situation. It's like being more interested in looking good than in actually succeeding." The lesson continued for an hour, with Marcus gradually introducing concepts that had revolutionized his own understanding. Jake's resistance to these ideas was initially strong, but as Marcus demonstrated their practical applications, the young fighter began to show genuine interest. By the end of the session, Jake was asking thoughtful questions about motivation, tactical intelligence, and the difference between fighting skills and conflict resolution abilities. The transformation reminded Marcus of his own journey from certainty to curiosity. After Jake left, Marcus reviewed his notes from the session. He had been documenting his teaching experiences as part of the honesty protocol that Somchai required, tracking not just successful applications of new principles, but also moments where old competitive habits reasserted themselves. The documentation revealed interesting patterns. Marcus found that he applied Somchai's principles most successfully when working with students, but struggled more when facing direct challenges to his own abilities. His sponsors' demands for aggressive, dominant content often pulled him back toward ego-driven responses that contradicted what he was learning. The business side of his career had indeed changed as Somchai predicted. 2 sponsors had ended their contracts when Marcus began posting content about learning from failure and questioning assumptions about fighting effectiveness. But other sponsors had emerged, companies that valued authenticity and personal growth over simple dominance displays. His social media following had also evolved. His subscriber count had dropped by about 30%, but engagement rates had actually increased. The followers who remained were more interested in substantive content about martial arts development than viral videos of one-sided sparring matches. The phone rang as Marcus finished his documentation, displaying Samkai's contact information. Their quarterly check-in calls had become one of the most valuable parts of Marcus's modified training program. "How has your practice been developing?" Samkai's familiar voice asked after brief pleasantries. Marcus spent 20 minutes reporting his observations from the previous 3 months. He described successful applications of conflict de-escalation principles, moments where competitive ego had overridden tactical intelligence, and growing awareness of how external pressures influenced his internal state. "You are becoming more honest about your limitations," Samchai observed approvingly. "This is sign of progress, not weakness." "It's been challenging to maintain that honesty," Marcus admitted. "There's constant pressure to present myself as having all the answers, especially when teaching other people." "Understandable pressure," Samchai agreed. "But consider, does student benefit more from teacher who pretends to be perfect or from teacher who models honest self-examination and continuous growth?" The question reframed Marcus's teaching approach in a way that made vulnerability feel like strength rather than weakness. Students like Jake were learning not just techniques, but attitudes toward learning that would serve them long after their formal training ended. "I've been thinking about something," Marcus said. "Would it be possible for me to bring some students with me on my next trip to Bangkok? I think experiencing your instruction directly might accelerate their development." Samchai was quiet for several moments, considering the proposal. "Possible, but with important conditions. Students must understand that they are coming to learn, not to test themselves or prove their abilities. Training will focus on principles, not techniques. And you must take responsibility for preparing them appropriately." Marcus felt excitement at the prospect of sharing Samkai's teaching more directly with his students. "What kind of preparation would be necessary?" "Same preparation you received, but more gradual. Students must understand difference between fighting skills and conflict understanding. Must be willing to question assumptions about what martial arts should provide. Most importantly, must demonstrate genuine interest in learning rather than just improving competitive abilities." They spent the remainder of the call developing criteria for selecting students who would benefit from the Bangkok experience. The standards were stringent, emphasizing psychological readiness and philosophical maturity over technical abilities. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself testing these criteria with a group of 6 potential students. Rather than using traditional sparring to evaluate their readiness, he employed exercises that Samchai had designed to reveal motivation and adaptability. The results were illuminating. Several students who were technically excellent proved unable to adjust their approach when faced with unfamiliar, "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" The voice of David Richardson, Marcus's manager for the past 5 years, cut through the peaceful morning atmosphere of the Bangkok hotel room like a buzzsaw. Marcus had barely said hello before the interrogation began. "Your last post has sponsors asking questions. No training videos, no location tags, no product placements. And what's this cryptic stuff about discovering how much you don't know? That's not your brand, man." Marcus rubbed his temples, suddenly, remembering the world of obligations and expectations that existed beyond the quiet courtyard where he had been learning to understand conflict rather than simply win it. "I'm having some interesting training experiences here," Marcus said carefully. "Learning some new perspectives on martial arts." "Perspectives don't pay the bills," David shot back. "You've got 3 major sponsors who signed contracts based on your image as an unbeatable champion. The energy drink people especially are nervous about any content that suggests you're anything less than completely dominant." Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. His sponsorship deals were worth more than his tournament winnings, and they all contained clauses about maintaining his public image as a successful, confident fighter. Any content that showed weakness or uncertainty could void contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I understand the business concerns," Marcus began, but David cut him off. "Do you?" "Because I just got off the phone with Ultimate Nutrition, and they're reconsidering the renewal on your contract. They want to know why their premier athlete is posting content about not knowing things instead of showcasing the superior training that their supplements enable." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with David outlining the immediate demands from various sponsors and booking agents. Marcus had commitments for training videos featuring specific products, appearances at martial arts exhibitions, and a documentary crew that was scheduled to film his unstoppable training regimen next month. All of it depended on maintaining the image of Marcus Chun as an invincible champion whose methods and abilities were worthy of emulation. After the call ended, Marcus sat staring out his hotel window at the Bangkok skyline, feeling the weight of the choice that Somchai had warned him about. The guard had been right to emphasize that continuing his training would require questioning assumptions about success and identity. Marcus just hadn't realized how many people had financial interests in maintaining those assumptions. His phone buzzed with messages from followers confused by his unusual post. The responses followed predictable patterns. "Everything okay, champ? You don't sound like yourself. Hope you're not getting soft on us. We need videos of you dominating some Thai fighters. When are you going to show us some serious sparring footage? This philosophical stuff isn't what we follow you for." Each message reinforced the reality that his livelihood depended on being the Marcus Chun who never lost, never doubted himself, and never encountered challenges he couldn't overcome through superior technique and training. But that version of Marcus Chun felt increasingly like a character he was playing rather than who he actually was. At noon, Marcus made a decision that surprised him. Instead of heading to one of Bangkok's famous tourist training gyms to film the kind of content his followers expected, he walked to the royal palace and waited near the main entrance. Somchai appeared during his lunch break, dressed in civilian clothes and carrying a simple meal in a cloth bag. He showed no surprise at seeing Marcus waiting for him. "You have made decision already?" the guard asked, settling onto a nearby bench and unwrapping his lunch. "I have a question," Marcus replied, sitting beside him. "What would happen to your life if you couldn't be a palace guard anymore?" Somchai considered the question while eating rice and vegetables with practiced efficiency. "I would find other work. Teach martial arts, perhaps, or work with security company. Guard training provides many useful skills. But wouldn't you lose your identity, your status, everything you've worked to achieve?" The guard's expression showed genuine puzzlement at the question. Guard position is job, not identity. Martial arts training is practice, not achievement to be possessed. If external circumstances change, practice continues. Marcus realized that Somchai's relationship with his abilities was fundamentally different from his own. The guard didn't seem to derive his self-worth from his position or reputation, which made him free to focus on continuous learning rather than protecting an image. "I have financial obligations," Marcus explained. "Contracts, sponsors, people who depend on me maintaining a certain public image. If I change how I approach martial arts, I could lose everything I've built." Somchai nodded thoughtfully. Understandable concern. "But tell me, what have you built? Money and reputation, yes. But what else?" The question forced Marcus to examine his accomplishments from a different perspective. His championship titles would always exist as historical facts. His technical skills, while incomplete by Somchai's standards, were still substantial. His physical conditioning and competitive experience represented years of dedicated training. "I suppose the knowledge and ability I've developed would still exist, even if the business side changed," Marcus said slowly. "Correct. External recognition can be lost, but internal development cannot be taken away." Somchai paused, then added, "However, choosing between security and growth is not a decision anyone else can make for you." Marcus spent the afternoon wandering through Bangkok, thinking about the conversation and trying to imagine different possible futures. He could return to Los Angeles, resume his competitive career, and maintain the lucrative image that his sponsors required. It would be comfortable and financially secure, but it would also mean abandoning the deeper understanding that Somchai had begun to show him. Alternatively, he could risk his established career to pursue training that might fundamentally change his approach to martial arts and life. The potential for growth was enormous, but so was the potential for losing everything he had worked to build. As evening approached, Marcus found himself back at the royal palace, watching Somchai complete his guard duties. The man's demeanor remained unchanged from their first meeting, alert but calm, ready but not aggressive, present but not performative. When Somchai's shift ended, he approached Marcus with a slight smile. "Still considering your choice?" "Actually, I think I've been asking the wrong question," Marcus replied. "Instead of trying to choose between my old life and a new one, I'm wondering if there's a way to integrate what you've taught me with the responsibilities I already have. Samkai's expression showed interest rather than disappointment at this modified approach. Explain your thinking. Marcus had spent hours developing his thoughts on this possibility. What if I could learn from you gradually, over multiple trips to Thailand, while maintaining my existing commitments? I could apply your principles to my competitive fighting, share some of the insights with my followers, but do it in a way that doesn't destroy the business relationships I've built. Integration rather than replacement, Samchai mused. Possible approach, but with important considerations. They found a quiet restaurant where Samchai explained the challenges of partial training. The principles he taught were interconnected, requiring consistent practice and philosophical commitment to be effective. Someone who tried to apply advanced concepts while maintaining fundamentally competitive mindset might find the techniques ineffective or even counterproductive. Half understanding can be more dangerous than no understanding, Samchai warned. If you learn to see deeper levels of conflict but continue to approach them with winning-losing mentality, you may create more problems than you solve. Marcus understood the concern, but he also felt that some progress was better than no progress. What if we started very slowly? Basic principles that I could apply gradually, with your guidance to ensure I'm not misapplying what I learn. Samchai was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing the proposal against his experience with other students. Finally, he spoke. There is precedent for such approach, but it requires extraordinary honesty from student. You would need to report not just your successes, but your failures and confusions. Anytime you apply training incorrectly, you must be willing to examine what went wrong and why. I can commit to that level of honesty, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely certain what it would require. We shall see, Samchai replied with a slight smile. Honesty about failure is more difficult than people expect, especially for those accustomed to public success. They spent the next 2 hours developing a framework for Marcus's modified training program. He would return to Los Angeles to fulfill his immediate obligations, but he would also begin incorporating some of Samkai's basic principles into his regular training routine. Every 3 months, he would return to Bangkok for intensive instruction and evaluation of his progress. Most importantly, Marcus would begin documenting his learning process honestly, sharing both successes and struggles with his followers. Instead of presenting himself as an infallible champion, he would model the process of continuous growth and learning. This approach will change your public image, Samchai warned. Followers who expect only strength and victory may lose interest. Sponsors who want perfect champion may seek other athletes. Marcus had considered these risks extensively. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. The followers and sponsors I keep will be the ones who value authenticity and growth, which might be a better foundation for long-term success. Samchai nodded approvingly. Wisdom in that thinking. Better to have smaller audience that truly understands your message than large audience that expects you to remain unchanged. As they finalized the arrangement, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the path he was choosing. It was neither the complete transformation that Samchai had initially offered nor the safe continuation of his existing career. Instead, it was something more challenging, an attempt to evolve gradually while maintaining enough stability to sustain his livelihood. The next morning, Marcus returned to the ancient courtyard for what would be his last intensive training session before returning to Los Angeles. Samchai had prepared a specific set of exercises designed to provide a foundation for the modified training program they had developed. Today we will establish baseline, the guard explained as they began with breathing exercises. You must understand clearly what your current limitations are, so you can recognize progress as it develops. The session was unlike any training Marcus had experienced before. Instead of pushing him to perform at maximum capacity, Samchai repeatedly asked him to work at different intensity levels while maintaining awareness of his emotional and mental state. When Marcus threw techniques with competitive intensity, Samchai guided him to notice how his breathing changed, how his vision narrowed, how his tactical thinking became more rigid. When Marcus practiced the same techniques with calm focus, he discovered that his effectiveness actually increased even as his effort decreased. Intensity and effectiveness are not same thing, Samchai observed. Competition rewards maximum intensity, because rules create artificial environment. Real conflict requires appropriate intensity for specific situation. They worked on recognition patterns that would help Marcus identify when he was operating from competitive ego rather than tactical intelligence. The subtle differences in motivation created measurable changes in his technique execution, decision-making speed, and adaptability to unexpected situations. By the end of the session, Marcus had a clear understanding of what he would be working to develop during his months away from Thailand. The goals were specific but challenging. Maintain his competitive abilities while reducing his dependence on ego-driven intensity. Learn to adapt his responses based on opponent psychology rather than just technique. And develop the kind of honest self-assessment that would allow him to continue learning rather than just defending his existing knowledge. Most important lesson for your training in America, Somchai said as they concluded. When you encounter a situation where your ego wants to prove superiority, pause and ask, what would serve this situation best? Sometimes answer is still competitive victory, but sometimes answer is something completely different. Marcus committed the instruction to memory, understanding that applying it consistently would be far more difficult than remembering it intellectually. As he prepared to leave the courtyard for the last time, Marcus turned back to Somchai with a question that had been troubling him. What if I can't maintain the honesty and self-examination you're asking for? What if the pressures of my career gradually pull me back into old patterns? Somchai's expression was understanding rather than judgmental. Then, you will learn an important lesson about how external pressures affect internal development. Failure to maintain practice is still valuable information, as long as you are honest about why failure occurred. The answer was both reassuring and challenging. Marcus realized that even failing at this modified training program could provide insights, as long as he remained committed to understanding rather than just succeeding. Are you confident this approach will work? Marcus asked. Confidence is not relevant, Somchai replied calmly. Willingness to experiment honestly is what matters. We will discover together whether integration is possible for you at this time in your life. As Marcus walked away from the royal palace for what might be the last time as a student, he felt like he was carrying something precious but fragile. The knowledge that Somchai had shared with him had the potential to transform his understanding of martial arts and conflict, but only if he could protect it from the pressures and expectations that awaited him in Los Angeles. The flight home would give him 18 hours to prepare for the most challenging test of his martial arts career, applying advanced principles in a world that rewarded simple dominance. Somchai began the lesson by asking Marcus to attack him again, but with a crucial difference. Instead of trying to demonstrate superior technique, Marcus was instructed to attack with the genuine intention of proving a point or gaining something from victory. Choose specific goal, Somchai explained. Not defeat me, but something you actually want to achieve through defeating me. Marcus thought carefully about the instruction. I want to prove that karate training produces better fighters than traditional time methods. Good. Now attack me with that goal in mind. Fight to prove your point. Marcus settled into his stance, but immediately noticed something different about his mental state. Instead of focusing purely on technique execution, he found himself thinking about the broader implications of the encounter. He was fighting not just to win, but to validate his entire approach to martial arts. The change in motivation created subtle but significant differences in his technique selection and tactical approach. He chose attacks that showcased karate's strengths, emphasized the explosive power and linear techniques that distinguished his art from circular fighting styles. But, as he pressed his attack, something remarkable happened. Somchai's responses changed as well, adapting not just to Marcus's physical techniques, but to the underlying motivation driving them. When Marcus threw combinations designed to prove karate's superiority, Somchai's counters demonstrated why such attempts at proof were fundamentally flawed. He showed how the guard's training incorporated elements from multiple martial arts, making the idea of style versus style comparison meaningless. When Marcus attacked with techniques meant to showcase explosive power, Somchai's responses revealed how power without strategic thinking could be redirected and neutralized. Most importantly, when Marcus fought to validate his identity as a superior fighter, Somchai's calm effectiveness showed how the need for validation itself created vulnerabilities that could be exploited. After several minutes of this adjusted sparring, Samchai called a halt and gestured for Marcus to sit down. What did you observe? The guard asked. Marcus struggled to put his observations into words. Your responses changed based on why I was attacking, not just how I was attacking. Correct. In real conflict, understanding opponents' motivation is often more important than understanding their techniques. Techniques can be trained to become unpredictable, but motivations reveal patterns that are much harder to hide. Samchai moved to a different area of the courtyard, where ancient stone markers were arranged in a complex pattern that Marcus hadn't noticed before. Come, let me show you something. The stone markers, Marcus realized as they approached, were positioned at specific distances and angles that created multiple pathways through the space. Some routes were direct, others curved, or required changes in elevation. This is training tool used here for many generations, Samchai explained. Each stone represents different type of opponent, different motivation for conflict. Training involves learning to move through space while adapting to each challenge. He demonstrated by walking through the markers, his movement changing subtly as he approached each stone. Near some markers, his pace became slower and more cautious. Near others, he moved with fluid confidence. At certain positions, he paused completely, seeming to evaluate invisible obstacles. Each stone teaches different lesson about conflict, Samchai continued. This one represents opponent who fights from anger. This one represents opponent who fights from fear. This one represents opponent who fights to protect others. Marcus studied the arrangement, beginning to see the sophisticated training method it represented. You're practicing not just fighting techniques, but fighting different types of people. Understanding different types of people, Samchai corrected. Fighting is only one possible response to conflict. Often, it is not the best response. He guided Marcus to the first stone marker, which was positioned near the entrance to the pattern. This represents opponent who seeks to prove themselves through victory. What would you do if faced with such person? Marcus's first instinct was to answer with fighting strategies, but something in Samchai's tone suggested that wasn't the expected response. I'm not sure. Try to defeat them before they can prove their point. Perhaps. But consider, what does such person actually want? Not fighting itself, but what fighting represents to them. Marcus thought about his own motivations from the previous day. Validation, recognition, proof that their training and dedication means something. Exactly. So question becomes, can you provide what they seek without engaging in destructive conflict? The concept was revolutionary to Marcus. His entire competitive career had been built on the assumption that martial arts encounters were zero-sum. One person won, the other lost. The idea that both parties might achieve their goals without traditional victory and defeat had never occurred to him. How? Marcus asked. Samchai smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Marcus had seen from him. Yesterday, what did you learn from our encounter? Marcus considered the question seriously. That my understanding of martial arts was incomplete. That there are levels of skill and knowledge I hadn't reached. That true mastery involves principles I'd never encountered. And did learning these things diminish your accomplishments as champion? No, Marcus realized. If anything, it made me more interested in improving. So you achieved validation of your dedication to martial arts, recognition that your skills are worth developing further, and proof that your training has given you foundation for greater understanding. You received what you sought, but not through victory in combat. The lesson continued as they moved through the stone marker pattern, with each position teaching Marcus about different approaches to conflict resolution. Some situations called for decisive action, others required patience and de-escalation, still others demanded strategic retreat or redirection. By the time they completed the full circuit, Marcus felt like he had received an education in human psychology as much as martial arts technique. This is what real palace guard training involves. Marcus asked as they returned to the center of the courtyard. Part of it, Samchai confirmed. Palace guards must protect people, but protection sometimes means avoiding fights rather than winning them. Must understand difference between strength that threatens and strength that reassures. He demonstrated the concept by having Marcus approach him in different mental states. First with aggressive intent, then with fearful uncertainty, finally with respectful interest. In each case, Samchai's posture and positioning adjusted to communicate different messages. though his actual fighting capability remained unchanged. Same guard, same training, same ability to protect, Somchai explained. But communication changes based on what situation requires. Marcus began to understand why his initial assessment of the guard had been so wrong. He had been looking for signs of fighting ability in the traditional sense, but Somchai's training encompassed a much broader definition of protective capability. How long does it take to learn this? Marcus asked. Somchai's expression became thoughtful. Techniques can be learned in months or years. Understanding principles takes longer. Applying understanding wisely. This is lifetime study. Would you be willing to teach me? I mean, beyond just these few days? The request surprised Marcus as much as it seemed to surprise Somchai. Marcus had never considered extending his stay in Thailand, and he certainly hadn't planned to abandon his competitive career for additional training. But the knowledge that Somchai possessed seemed more valuable than any tournament victory. You would give up championship career for this training? Somchai asked seriously. The question forced Marcus to examine his priorities more honestly than he had in years. His competitive success had brought him fame, sponsorship money, and social media influence, but it had also locked him into a narrow definition of martial arts excellence. I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I know that yesterday changed something fundamental in how I think about fighting and martial arts. I can't just go back to tournament competition and pretend I haven't seen what you've shown me. Somchai nodded slowly, as if Marcus's confusion was itself a positive sign. Good answer. Certainty about such decision would be concerning. This kind of training requires leaving behind many assumptions about what martial arts should provide. They spent the remaining hour working on basic exercises that looked nothing like traditional martial arts training. Somchai taught Marcus breathing techniques that enhanced his awareness of his own emotional state during conflict. They practiced walking patterns that developed sensitivity to spatial relationships and positioning. Most unusually, they worked on stillness exercises where Marcus learned to remain completely motionless while maintaining readiness to move in any direction. Stillness is not passivity, Somchai explained as Marcus struggled with the subtle balance required. Stillness is preparation for appropriate action. If you are always moving, always acting, you cannot observe clearly enough to choose best response. By the end of the session, Marcus felt physically exhausted despite doing relatively little intense physical activity. The mental demands of constantly adjusting his approach based on changing situations were unlike anything he had experienced in traditional training. As they prepared to leave the ancient courtyard, Somchai turned to Marcus with a serious expression. I will ask you a question, and I want completely honest answer, the guard said. Not what you think I want to hear, not what makes you sound dedicated or impressive. True answer about what you were thinking. Marcus nodded, bracing himself for whatever was coming. Do you want to continue this training because you believe it will make you a better fighter? Or because you want to understand something deeper about conflict and human nature? The question cut to the heart of motivations that Marcus wasn't entirely sure he understood himself. His competitive instincts urged him to claim that he wanted deeper understanding, since that seemed to be what Somchai valued. But the guard's emphasis on honesty forced him to examine his actual feelings. Both, Marcus said finally. I do want to become a better fighter, because that's been my identity for so long that I can't just abandon it. But what you've shown me suggests that being a better fighter might mean something completely different than what I thought. Somchai studied him for a long moment, then nodded with apparent approval. Honest answer. Good foundation for real learning. He paused, then added, if you decide to continue training, understand that it will change how you think about many things. Not just fighting, but how you approach challenges, how you understand other people, how you define success and failure. Are you warning me against it? I am ensuring you understand what you are choosing, Somchai replied. Many people want to learn advanced techniques, but fewer are prepared for advanced understanding. Techniques are comfortable because they provide clear goals and measurable progress. Understanding is more difficult because it requires questioning assumptions you may not realize you hold. Marcus thought about his social media following, his sponsorship deals, his reputation as an unbeatable champion. All of those things were built on a particular image of martial arts excellence that might not survive the kind of questioning Somchai was describing. What if I'm not ready for that level of change? Marcus asked honestly. Then, You continue with training you were already doing, Somchai said without judgment. Championship competition is valuable path. But it is not only path, and it is not necessarily best path for every person. They walked back through the palace complex in contemplative silence. Marcus felt like he was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just his immediate future, but the entire direction of his life. When they reached the main entrance where they had first met, Somchai stopped and faced Marcus directly. Take time to consider what you truly want from martial arts training, the guard advised. When you have clear answer, return here. But do not rush decision. Wrong choice wastes time for both teacher and student. Marcus wanted to protest that he had already made his decision, that he was certain he wanted to continue learning from Somchai. But something in the guard's manner suggested that certainty itself might be evidence of not understanding the choice clearly enough. How long should I take to decide? Marcus asked. As long as necessary, Somchai replied. This training has continued for generations. It will continue regardless of your choice. Question is whether it is right path for you at this time in your life. As Marcus walked back to his hotel, he found himself reviewing everything that had happened since his arrival in Bangkok. 2 days ago, he had been a confident champion looking to create impressive content for his social media followers. Now he was questioning fundamental assumptions about martial arts, success, and his own identity. The transformation was both exhilarating and terrifying. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room with his laptop open, staring at a blank document where he had intended to write about his Bangkok experiences. His followers expected regular updates. His sponsors required social media activity to justify their investment, and his reputation depended on maintaining the image of constant excellence and adventure. But how could he explain what had actually happened without undermining everything his personal brand represented? The video from his first encounter with Somchai remained on his phone, unwatched since that initial humbling review. The footage contained evidence of his comprehensive defeat by an unknown palace guard, material that would destroy his carefully constructed image if it ever became public. Yet Marcus found himself reluctant to delete it. The video represented something valuable, even if he couldn't yet articulate what that something was. Instead of writing his usual upbeat post about amazing training experiences and cultural discoveries, Marcus found himself crafting a very different message. Sometimes the most important lessons come from discovering how much you don't know. Bangkok has shown me that mastery is not a destination, but a journey that constantly reveals new horizons. Taking some time to reflect on what it means to be a martial artist versus what it means to be a fighter. He posted the message without his usual accompanying video or photos, then turned off his phone to avoid the immediate flood of questions and comments that his followers typically generated. For the first time in years, Marcus fell asleep without checking his social media metrics or planning content for the following day. Instead, he found himself thinking about ancient courtyards, stone markers, and the profound difference between proving yourself and understanding yourself. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from his manager in Los Angeles. The conversation would force Marcus to confront the practical implications of the choice that Somchai had asked him to consider carefully. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. As he threw his most devastating combinations, techniques that had finished opponents in international competitions, Somchai moved with the calm efficiency of someone handling a routine training exercise. The guard's breathing hadn't changed, his stance remained relaxed, and his counters continued arriving with surgical precision. Marcus stepped back, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to process what was happening. In 12 years of professional fighting, he had never encountered anything like this. Even his toughest opponents had shown signs of effort when facing his championship-level attacks. They might have handled his techniques successfully, but they had worked for their victories. Somchai looked as fresh as when they had started. "You fight with much skill," the guard said quietly, his tone carrying no hint of mockery or triumph. "Your techniques are very refined. Championship level, I think." The casual acknowledgement somehow made everything worse. Marcus had just thrown everything he had at this man, and Somchai was discussing it like a technical evaluation rather than the desperate assault it had become. "Thank you," Marcus managed, though the words felt hollow. "Your defensive work is exceptional. Where did you train?" Somchai's expression didn't change. "Here and there." Many years of practice. The non-answer was maddening, but Marcus sensed that pushing for details would be futile. Instead, he tried to understand what he was seeing from a technical perspective. Somkai's style didn't match any classical martial art that Marcus recognized. It wasn't pure Muay Thai, though elements of that art were clearly present. It wasn't traditional kung fu, karate, or any of the other systems Marcus had studied. Yet somehow, it was devastatingly effective. Could we continue? Marcus asked, surprising himself with the request. I'd like to understand your techniques better. Somchai studied him for a moment, perhaps evaluating whether Marcus could handle more of what he had just experienced. Finally, he nodded. As you wish. But perhaps we should discuss what you hope to learn. Marcus considered the question carefully. His original plan had been to demonstrate his superiority over a local guard, creating content that would impress his social media followers. That goal now seemed not just impossible, but laughably naive. I want to understand how you move, Marcus said honestly. Your timing, your defensive principles. I've never seen anything like it. Movement comes from understanding, Somchai replied. Many fighters focus on techniques, on forms, on power. These are important, but they are not foundation. What is the foundation? Somchai gestured for Marcus to resume his fighting stance. Show me your strongest attack. The technique you would use to finish important fight. Marcus thought for a moment, then settled into position. His strongest finishing technique was a combination that had won him 3 championship titles. A feinted low kick followed by a jumping knee strike that generated tremendous power from his athletic ability and perfect timing. He had never seen anyone successfully defend against it when executed at full speed and power. This technique has won me more fights than any other, Marcus explained as he prepared to demonstrate. The setup creates a blind spot in most defensive systems. Somchai nodded encouragingly. Show me, please. Marcus launched into the combination with championship intensity. His feinted low kick was perfectly executed, convincing enough to draw any defender's attention downward. His transition into the jumping knee was explosive, delivered with all the speed and power that had made him a world champion. The knee strike never connected. Somehow, Somchai had moved in a way that placed him completely outside the attack's range, while simultaneously positioning himself for a counter that Marcus never saw coming. The guard's palm strike caught Marcus in the chest with enough force to send him stumbling backward, his perfectly planned combination completely neutralized. But more disturbing than the defensive success was what Marcus realized about Somkai's movement. The guard hadn't just avoided the attack. He had moved in a way that made the attack impossible to execute properly. By stepping at a specific angle with precise timing, Somchai had eliminated the distance and positioning that Marcus's technique required to be effective. It wasn't just good defense. It was strategic negation of the attack before it could fully develop. Your technique is powerful, Somchai observed as Marcus regained his balance. But it requires specific distance and timing to work. Change those requirements, and technique becomes less useful. Marcus stared at him, beginning to understand that he was receiving instruction in principles he had never encountered before. You're not just defending against my attacks. You're changing the conditions that make them possible. Understanding is beginning, Somchai said with what might have been approval. Many fighters train to execute techniques perfectly. Few are trained to understand why techniques work or fail. The lesson continued for another 20 minutes, with Somchai systematically demonstrating how Marcus's most reliable techniques could be neutralized not through superior speed or power, but through better understanding of fighting principles. Every attack Marcus attempted was turned into a teaching moment, with the guard explaining how small adjustments in distance, timing, or positioning could completely change the effectiveness of even perfect technique execution. By the end of the session, Marcus felt like he had received more valuable instruction than in months of formal training. But he also felt something else, a profound humbling that challenged everything he thought he knew about martial arts. As they finished, Somchai glanced at the phone that had been recording their exchange. You wish to make video of our training? Marcus looked at the device, remembering his original intentions for the footage. The video would show him being systematically outclassed by a palace guard whose name he barely knew. It would destroy the image he had spent years building as an unbeatable champion. I'm not sure the video captured what I was hoping for, Marcus admitted. Somkai's expression showed what might have been amusement. Perhaps what you captured is more valuable than what you hoped for. Before Marcus could respond, the guard straightened his uniform and began walking back toward his post. Their private lesson was apparently over. Wait, Marcus called after him. Could I train with you again? I'd like to learn more about these principles you've shown me. Somchai paused, considering the request. I am palace guard. My duties do not include teaching tourists. I'm not asking as a tourist, Marcus said quickly. I'm asking as a martial artist who has just realized how much he doesn't understand about real fighting. The guard studied him for a long moment, perhaps evaluating whether Marcus's newfound humility was genuine or merely another attempt at manipulation. Come tomorrow, Somchai said finally. Early morning, before tourist crowds arrive. We will see if your interest in learning is stronger than your interest in proving yourself. Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. What time? 6 o'clock. Main entrance. Somkai's expression became serious. But, understand this. If you come tomorrow, you come to learn, not to test yourself against me. I am not your opponent. I am not your equal. I am teacher, and you are student. Can you accept this? The question hung in the air between them, demanding an honest answer that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to give. Everything in his competitive nature rebelled against the idea of accepting inferior status to anyone, especially someone whose credentials he knew nothing about. But the memory of being systematically dismantled by techniques he couldn't even understand forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. His championship titles and international reputation meant nothing if they were based on incomplete understanding. Yes, Marcus said quietly. I can accept that. Somchai nodded once, then turned and walked back to his post without another word. Marcus stood alone in the partially secluded area, surrounded by the golden splendor of the royal palace, trying to process what had just happened to him. An hour ago, he had been a confident world champion looking to create impressive content by dominating a local guard. Now he was a confused student who had discovered that his understanding of martial arts was far more limited than he had ever imagined. He retrieved his phone and stopped the recording, staring at the device that contained footage of his comprehensive humiliation. The smart thing would be to delete the video and never speak of what had happened. His reputation depended on maintaining the image of invincible excellence that his sponsors and followers expected. But, as Marcus walked away from the palace, he found himself thinking about Somkai's words. Perhaps what you captured is more valuable than what you hoped for. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room reviewing the footage on his laptop. Watching the encounter from an outside perspective was even more humbling than experiencing it in person. The video showed clearly what he had struggled to accept in the moment. He had been completely outmatched from the very beginning. Every technique that Marcus executed with championship precision was answered by Somchai with minimal effort and maximum effectiveness. The guard's movements looked almost casual compared to Marcus's intense athletic display, yet they were devastatingly successful. More disturbing was how the video revealed details that Marcus had missed during the actual encounter. Somkai's footwork followed patterns that Marcus didn't recognize, but could see were incredibly sophisticated. The guard's defensive positions seemed to anticipate Marcus's attacks before they were fully formed. His counterstrikes landed with precision that suggested he understood Marcus's fighting style better than Marcus understood it himself. But what troubled Marcus most was a realization that came from studying Somkai's face throughout the encounter. The guard never looked surprised, never appeared to be struggling with tactical decisions, never showed signs of being challenged by Marcus's championship-level skills. He had been fighting at the level necessary to provide instruction, nothing more. Marcus closed the laptop and stared out his hotel window at the Bangkok skyline. In 12 years of professional fighting, he had built his identity around being the best, the champion, the fighter who could defeat anyone through superior technique and relentless training. But tomorrow morning, he would return to the palace as a student, acknowledging that someone he had initially dismissed as a ceremonial guard possessed knowledge and abilities that dwarfed his own accomplishments. The question that kept him awake that night wasn't whether he could accept the humbling experience of being a beginner again. It was whether he could handle learning just how much he didn't know about the art he had devoted his life to mastering. When Marcus woke at 5:30 the next morning, his first instinct was to stay in bed and avoid the appointment altogether. He could spend the day touring other parts of Bangkok, create some safe content featuring local culture and cuisine, then return to Los Angeles with his reputation intact and his ego unbruised. But as he lay there considering the comfortable option, Marcus realized that comfort was exactly what had made him vulnerable to yesterday's wake-up call. Years of being the best fighter in every room had insulated him from the reality that there were levels of understanding he had never reached. Somchai had offered him an opportunity to explore those levels, but only if Marcus could abandon the need to be impressive and accept the more challenging goal of actually learning. At 5:45, Marcus was dressed and heading toward the palace, carrying nothing but his phone and a water bottle. He had decided to leave his expensive camera behind, abandoning any pretense that this was about creating content for his followers. The streets of Bangkok were quieter at this hour, with only early commuters and street vendors beginning their daily routines. The golden spires of the royal palace caught the first light of dawn, creating a backdrop that would have been perfect for the kind of inspirational training video Marcus usually produced. But inspiration, he was beginning to understand, was very different from education. When Marcus arrived at the main entrance, Somchai was already waiting. The guard was dressed in civilian clothes rather than his formal uniform. Simple dark pants, a plain white shirt, and canvas shoes that looked worn from years of use. Without the ceremonial trappings of his official position, he looked like any middle-aged Thai man, except for his eyes, which held the quiet confidence that Marcus had noticed the previous day. "You came," Somchai observed, though his tone suggested he hadn't been entirely certain Marcus would appear. "I said I would," Marcus replied, then added more honestly, "though I considered not coming." Somchai's expression showed approval rather than surprise at the admission. Honest answer. Good beginning for learning. He gestured for Marcus to follow him away from the main entrance, leading him through a series of smaller gates and pathways that Marcus hadn't known existed. They walked in silence for several minutes, passing through areas of the palace complex that seemed reserved for staff and maintenance rather than public access. Eventually, they arrived at a small courtyard surrounded by traditional buildings that looked much older than the main palace structures. The space was completely private, shielded from tourist areas and public walkways. Ancient trees provided shade, and the ground was covered with soft earth rather than concrete or stone. "This is where real training happens," Somchai explained, settling into a comfortable seated position on a raised stone platform at one edge of the courtyard. Not for demonstration, not for testing strength, for understanding. Marcus looked around the quiet space, feeling the weight of history in the weathered walls and carefully maintained grounds. "How long have people trained here?" "Long time. Many generations." Somchai gestured for Marcus to sit across from him. "Before we begin physical training, you must understand something important. What you learned yesterday about your fighting skills, this was not failure on your part." Marcus felt surprise at the unexpected reassurance. It felt like failure. "Feeling and reality are different things," Somchai replied calmly. "Your techniques are excellent. Your conditioning is impressive. Your dedication is obvious. These are not failures." "Then, what was yesterday about?" Somchai was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider how to explain something complex in simple terms. "Tell me, what is the purpose of your martial arts training?" The question seemed basic, but Marcus found himself struggling to answer it clearly. "To become a better fighter, I suppose. To develop skill, to compete successfully." "And you have achieved these goals, yes? You are champion, you defeat many opponents, you have recognition for your abilities." "Yes," Marcus agreed, though he sensed where the conversation was heading. "So your martial arts training has been very successful," Somchai continued. "You have mastered the purpose you set for yourself. But perhaps there are other purposes that you have not yet explored." Marcus waited for the explanation he sensed was coming. "In my training, fighting skill is important, but it is not primary goal," Somchai said. "Primary goal is understanding. Understanding yourself, understanding your opponent, understanding the principles that govern conflict and resolution." "I thought I understood those things," Marcus said quietly. "You understand them at one level," Somchai corrected gently. "Championship level, competition level. This is good understanding, but it is not complete understanding." He stood and moved to the center of the courtyard, gesturing for Marcus to join him. "Show me your fighting stance." Marcus took the position that had served him well in hundreds of competitions: balanced, aggressive, optimized for explosive movement and rapid technique execution. Samchai circled him slowly, observing from different angles. "Good stance for tournament fighting. But, tell me, what does this stance communicate to potential opponent?" Marcus considered the question. "Readiness to fight. Technical competence. Confidence. Yes. And what else?" Marcus thought harder, trying to see his stance from an outside perspective. "Aggression? Intent to engage." "Correct. Your stance says, 'I am here to fight you.' This is good message for competition, where fighting is expected goal. But what if fighting is not best solution to conflict?" The question opened a line of thinking that Marcus had never pursued. His entire martial arts career had been focused on being better at fighting than anyone else. He had never considered that fighting itself might not always be the optimal outcome. "I'm not sure I understand," Marcus admitted. Samchai nodded as if this confusion was expected. "Yesterday, when you challenged me to demonstrate techniques, what was your goal?" Marcus felt heat rise in his face as he remembered his original intentions. "To show off, I suppose. To demonstrate that I was a superior fighter." "And what did you hope to gain from proving this superiority?" "Social media content. Validation. Proof that my training was better than traditional methods." The honesty of his motivations embarrassed him, but Samchai had asked for truth. "So your goal was not actually to fight me," Samchai observed. "Your goal was to use fighting to achieve other objectives. Do you see difference?" Marcus began to understand the distinction. "You're saying that fighting was just a tool for me, not an end in itself." "Exactly. And if fighting is tool, then question becomes, what is best tool for achieving your actual goals?" The lesson that followed would fundamentally change Marcus's understanding of what martial arts could be. Marcus Chun had never lost a fight. Not in 12 years of competitive karate, not in the underground tournaments that paid his bills, and certainly not to anyone who looked as ordinary as the man standing guard outside the royal palace of Thailand. The summer heat in Bangkok made everything shimmer like a mirage, but Marcus felt cool and confident as he approached the ornate gates. His black belt was hidden beneath casual tourist clothes, but his movements carried the fluid precision of someone who had spent half his life perfecting the art of combat. At 28, he stood 6 feet tall with the lean muscle of a professional fighter, his reputation spanning from Los Angeles to Tokyo. "Just another photo opportunity," Marcus muttered to himself, adjusting the expensive camera hanging around his neck. He had come to Thailand on what his sponsors called a cultural exchange, but really it was a working vacation. His social media following of 2 million people expected content. And what better backdrop than the golden spires and emerald Buddhas of the royal palace? The guard who caught his attention stood motionless beside the main entrance. Unlike the other palace guards who rotated shifts or acknowledged tourists with polite nods, this man seemed carved from stone. He was shorter than Marcus by several inches, probably in his 40s, with graying hair visible beneath his traditional white uniform. His face showed no expression, his dark eyes focused somewhere beyond the crowd of tourists snapping photos. Marcus had seen statues with more personality. What intrigued Marcus wasn't the guard's stoic appearance, but something else entirely. The way he stood suggested a deep understanding of balance and center of gravity. His breathing was controlled, deliberate. Most people, even trained security personnel, shifted their weight unconsciously, favored one leg, or showed micro-expressions that revealed their thoughts. This guard displayed none of these tells. "Interesting," Marcus whispered, moving closer while pretending to frame shots with his camera. The guard's uniform was immaculate, but Marcus noticed something that made him pause. The man's hands, though relaxed at his sides, bore the telltale calluses of someone who had spent years conditioning them for combat. His knuckles showed old scars, and his fingers had the subtle thickness that came from decades of striking practice. Marcus felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation he experienced before stepping into a tournament ring. Here was someone who might actually present a challenge, though he seriously doubted it. Palace guards were trained for ceremony and crowd control, not real combat. This man might have some martial arts background, but Marcus had defeated former military personnel, Olympic athletes, and masters of various fighting styles. A ceremonial guard, no matter how disciplined he appeared, would be no different. The idea began forming in Marcus's mind as he circled the guard's position, taking photos of the palace architecture while studying his target. Social media loved when he demonstrated his skills against unexpected opponents. The video of him sparring with the bouncer in Las Vegas had garnered 3 million views. The clip where he schooled the aggressive bodybuilder in Miami Beach had launched his sponsorship deal with a major sports drink company. A royal palace guard would be perfect content. The contrast would be beautiful, a world champion karate fighter against a traditional Thai guard. The setting alone would make the video go viral. His followers would love seeing him respectfully demonstrate superior technique while honoring Thai culture. He could frame it as a cultural exchange, a friendly test of skills between martial artists from different traditions. Marcus approached the guard station with practiced casualness. Other tourists moved past constantly, creating a natural flow of foot traffic that would provide cover for his approach. He had done this dozens of times before, initiating conversations that would lead to impromptu demonstrations of his abilities. "Excuse me," Marcus said in English, then switched to the basic Thai phrases he had learned from his hotel concierge. "Crap, can sabai di mai?" The guard's eyes shifted to focus on Marcus without moving his head. For several seconds, he said nothing, simply observing with an intensity that felt almost physical. When he finally spoke, his English was clear but heavily accented. "You are tourist. Take photos. Move along." Marcus smiled his most disarming smile, the one that had charmed talk show hosts and impressed sponsors. "Actually, I'm here on a cultural mission. I'm a martial artist myself, and I have great respect for Thai fighting traditions. I was hoping to learn something about your training." The guard's expression didn't change. "I am palace guard, not teacher." Of course, Marcus nodded respectfully. "I just noticed your stance, your conditioning. You have martial arts training, don't you?" "I recognize the signs because I'm a professional fighter myself." For the first time, something flickered in the guard's eyes. It might have been amusement, or perhaps annoyance. "Professional fighter." "Yes, karate champion. I've competed internationally for over a decade." Marcus kept his tone humble while making sure to establish his credentials. "I've always been fascinated by different fighting styles. In my travels, I've had the privilege of training with masters from many traditions." The guard was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Marcus's face to his hands, then to his feet and posture. It felt like being evaluated by a master craftsman examining a piece of work. "Karate," the guard said finally. "Japanese art." "That's right. But I've studied others as well. Some Kung Fu, a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, even some Muay Thai since arriving in Thailand." Marcus gestured toward the guard's uniform. "I imagine your training incorporates traditional Thai martial arts." "I am palace guard," the man repeated. "My training is for protection duty." Marcus sensed an opening. "But surely that training includes combat techniques? Self-defense, restraining aggressive individuals, protecting dignitaries." He paused, then added with calculated humility, "I'd be honored to see how a royal guard trains. Perhaps we could share some techniques? I learned something from you. You learned something from me." The request hung in the air between them. Marcus knew he was walking a fine line between respectful interest and inappropriate behavior, but he had navigated similar situations successfully many times before. The key was making the guard feel respected while subtly challenging his abilities. Other tourists continued moving past them, some pausing to take photos of the ornate palace gates, others consulting guidebooks or listening to tour guides. The normal flow of activity provided perfect cover for their conversation. The guard studied Marcus for another long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped slightly to one side and gestured toward a less crowded area near the palace wall. "You wish to see Thai fighting technique?" Marcus felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly how these encounters usually began. The local fighter, intrigued by meeting an international champion, would agree to a friendly demonstration. Within minutes, Marcus would have impressive footage of himself easily handling another opponent while showing proper respect for local culture. "I would be very honored," Marcus replied, following the guard toward the indicated area. The space the guard had chosen was partially shielded from the main tourist flow by decorative pillars and landscaping. It provided enough privacy for a demonstration while remaining within sight of other palace security personnel. Marcus appreciated the guard's tactical thinking, even as he prepared to demonstrate why international championship experience trumped local training every time. "What is your name?" the guard asked as they settled into the more secluded space. "Marcus Chun." "And yours?" "Somchai." The guard's expression remained neutral. "You said you study Muay Thai since coming to Thailand. What have you learned?" Marcus launched into a description of the training sessions he had attended at a popular gym in downtown Bangkok. He had indeed spent several mornings learning basic Muay Thai techniques, more for the social media content than serious study. The training had been interesting, but nothing he couldn't handle easily with his existing skills. "The knee strikes are powerful," Marcus explained, demonstrating a basic technique in slow motion. "And I can see how the clinch work would be effective against untrained opponents. But against someone with real grappling experience and superior footwork." He left the statement hanging, letting Somchai draw his own conclusions. Somchai nodded thoughtfully. "You believe your karate is superior to Muay Thai?" "Not superior," Marcus corrected diplomatically. "Different. Each art has its strengths. Karate emphasizes precision, speed, and explosive power. The linear techniques and angular movements create openings that circular arts sometimes miss." "Show me," Somchai said simply. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He pulled out his phone and set it up against a decorative urn, positioning it to capture both fighters in frame. The lighting was perfect, the backdrop impressive, and the cultural significance undeniable. "Just a friendly demonstration," Marcus said, making sure his tone conveyed respect and sportsmanship. Light contact, focusing on technique rather than power. Somchai glanced at the phone, then back at Marcus. "You wish to record our training? If that's acceptable. I like to study my movements later, see what I can improve." Marcus didn't mention his real intentions for the footage. "But if you prefer not to be filmed, I understand completely." The guard considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "As you wish." Marcus activated the camera and stepped back into position. He had done this so many times that the movements felt automatic. Establish distance, assess the opponent's stance and guard position, then demonstrate superior technique through controlled exchanges that highlighted his advantages in speed, timing, and technical precision. Somchai settled into a basic fighting stance that looked like classical Muay Thai. His left foot was forward, hands raised in a traditional guard position, weight evenly distributed. It was textbook form, but Marcus noticed several exploitable weaknesses immediately. The guard's rear hand was positioned too low, his lead leg wasn't checked properly, and his movement looked stiff rather than fluid. "Ready when you are," Marcus said, settling into his own fighting stance. His karate base was immediately evident in his positioning. Side-facing stance that minimized his target profile, hands positioned for both attack and defense, and weight loaded onto his rear leg for explosive forward movement. Years of tournament fighting had refined his stance until every element served multiple purposes. Marcus began with simple movement patterns, advancing and retreating while maintaining perfect distance control. His footwork was crisp and precise, each step calculated to maintain optimal positioning for attack or counterattack. He could see Somchai tracking his movement, but the guard's reaction seemed sluggish by comparison. "In karate, we emphasize controlling distance," Marcus explained as he moved. "If you can control the space between fighters, you control the engagement." He demonstrated with a lightning-fast advance that brought him just into striking range, then immediately retreated before Somchai could respond. The technique was flawless, executed with the kind of explosive speed that had won him countless tournament matches. Somchai's response was to shuffle forward slightly, maintaining his basic stance without attempting to match Marcus's sophisticated footwork. To Marcus, it confirmed what he had suspected. The guard had some training, but lacked the advanced techniques necessary to compete with a true professional. "Your turn," Marcus offered. "Show me some traditional Thai techniques." Somchai moved forward with deliberate steps, his hands raised in a classic Muay Thai guard. His approach was straightforward, almost plodding compared to Marcus's dynamic movement. When he threw his first technique, a basic jab, Marcus was ready. The punch was well formed, but telegraphed from miles away. Marcus slipped it easily with a minimal head movement, then countered with a controlled reverse punch that stopped just inches from Samkai's solar plexus. "Nice try," Marcus said encouragingly. "But you're broadcasting your intentions with your shoulder movement. Watch." He demonstrated the same jab, showing how his version eliminated the preparatory movements that had telegraphed Samkai's attack. His technique was faster, more direct, and far more difficult to read. Samkai nodded as if learning, then attempted the improved version. His second jab was marginally better, but still easily avoided by Marcus's superior defensive skills. They continued exchanging basic techniques for several minutes. Marcus demonstrated his advantages in every exchange. His kicks were faster and more precise, his punches came from better angles, and his defensive movements were far more sophisticated. Samkai's responses grew slightly sharper as they continued, but never approached the level that would challenge Marcus's abilities. "You have good basic technique," Marcus offered as they paused to reset. "Your conditioning is obviously excellent, but there are some advanced concepts that could really improve your effectiveness." He began explaining some of the tactical principles that separated professional fighters from amateur practitioners. How to disguise attacking intentions, how to create openings through feints and misdirection, how to chain combinations that overwhelmed an opponent's defensive capabilities. Samkai listened intently, asking occasional questions that suggested he was genuinely interested in learning. Marcus found himself enjoying the role of instructor, sharing knowledge with someone who showed proper respect for his expertise. "Would you like to see how these concepts apply under pressure?" Marcus asked. "We could do some light sparring, just enough contact to make it realistic." Samkai considered the suggestion, glancing around the area to ensure they weren't attracting unwanted attention. The palace grounds remained busy with tourists, but their demonstration area stayed relatively private. "Light contact only," Samkai agreed. "This is not fighting. This is teaching." Marcus smiled and reset his camera to capture the sparring session. This footage would be perfect for his social media channels. An international champion sharing knowledge with a traditional Thai guard, bridging cultures through martial arts. His followers would love the respect he showed for local traditions while demonstrating his superior skills. They began with simple exchanges, each fighter testing the other's reactions and timing. Marcus immediately confirmed his initial assessment. Samkai was competent, but limited. His attacks were straightforward and predictable, his defenses adequate, but not sophisticated. Against an opponent of Marcus's caliber, these limitations would prove decisive. Marcus began increasing the pace gradually, introducing more complex combinations and advanced techniques. His years of professional training showed in every movement. Perfect timing, flawless technique execution, and tactical awareness that stayed several steps ahead of his opponent. Samkai adapted to the increased pace better than Marcus had expected, but his responses remained fundamentally limited by his training background. He relied heavily on basic Muay Thai techniques, showing little understanding of the advanced concepts that Marcus employed routinely. After several minutes of controlled sparring, Marcus decided to demonstrate a more significant technical advantage. He set up a complex combination that would showcase his speed, power, and tactical sophistication while maintaining the respectful tone of their exchange. The combination began with a feinted high kick that drew Samkai's guard upward, followed immediately by a low kick toward his lead leg, then a spinning back fist that would stop just short of contact. It was a tournament-winning sequence that had defeated far more experienced opponents than this palace guard. Marcus executed the first elements of the combination perfectly. His feint was convincing enough to raise Samkai's guard, and his low kick was delivered with precise timing and perfect technique. But something went wrong. Instead of connecting with Samkai's leg, Marcus's kick met empty air. The guard had moved in a way that Marcus hadn't anticipated, stepping forward and slightly to the side with timing that seemed impossible given the speed of Marcus's attack. Before Marcus could process what had happened or adjust for the spinning back fist that would complete his combination, he felt something that shocked him completely. Samkai's fist connected with his solar plexus with surgical precision and devastating effect. The punch wasn't particularly hard by professional fighting standards, but it landed in exactly the right spot with perfect timing. Marcus felt his diaphragm spasm, his breath catching as his carefully planned combination collapsed into confusion. For the first time in years, Marcus found himself genuinely off balance, struggling to understand how his perfect technique had been so easily countered by what should have been an inferior opponent. Somchai stepped back immediately, his expression showing mild concern rather than triumph. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. Marcus fought to regain his composure, his mind racing to analyze what had just occurred. The guard's movement had been so subtle, so perfectly timed, that Marcus had completely missed the defensive adjustment until it was too late. "I'm fine," Marcus managed, though his breathing was still slightly labored. "Good counter. I didn't expect that level of timing." Somchai's expression remained neutral. "In Palace Guard training, we learned to watch for patterns. Your combination was very skilled, but it followed predictable sequence." Marcus felt a flash of irritation at the casual dismissal of his technique, but he forced himself to maintain his friendly demeanor. Predictable was not a word that had ever been applied to his fighting style by any legitimate opponent. "Well, let me try something less predictable then," Marcus said, resetting his stance with more focus than before. This time, he wouldn't underestimate his opponent's abilities. Palace Guard or not, Somchai clearly had more skill than Marcus had initially recognized. But recognizing skill and being able to handle professional-level technique were very different things. Marcus began circling with increased intensity, his movement patterns becoming more complex and unpredictable. He varied his timing, changed levels frequently, and incorporated feints and misdirection that had confused far more experienced fighters. Somchai matched his movement, but with an economy of motion that Marcus found unsettling. Where Marcus was working to create openings through sophisticated footwork and tactical positioning, the guard seemed content to react and respond with minimal effort. When Marcus finally attacked, he did so with combinations that showcased his championship-level abilities. His techniques were faster, more powerful, and far more sophisticated than anything he had shown earlier. But somehow, Somchai was ready for every attack. The guard's defensive work was unlike anything Marcus had encountered before. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was absolutely effective. Every punch was deflected or avoided with minimal movement. Every kick was checked or evaded with perfect timing. More disturbing was how Somchai's counters seemed to arrive at exactly the moments when Marcus was most committed to his own attacks. The guard's punches found openings that Marcus didn't even realize he was creating, landing with precision that spoke of years of practical experience. After several minutes of increasingly intense exchanges, Marcus was forced to acknowledge an uncomfortable reality. He wasn't winning this sparring session. For the first time since his teenage years, he was facing an opponent who seemed genuinely capable of matching his abilities. But acknowledging the challenge only intensified Marcus's determination. He had built his reputation by rising to meet every test, by finding ways to overcome opponents who initially seemed formidable. This Palace Guard, skilled though he might be, would be no different. Marcus decided to escalate the intensity one more level, moving from light sparring into something closer to serious competition. His attacks became faster, his combinations more complex, his pressure constant and overwhelming. This was the level of fighting that had won him championships, the intensity that separated professional fighters from talented amateurs. Surely no ceremonial guard, regardless of his traditional training, could handle the sustained assault of a world-class competitor. But as Marcus pressed his attack with everything he had learned in 12 years of professional fighting, he began to realize something that would change his understanding of martial arts forever. Somchai wasn't just keeping up with his increased intensity. The guard was barely trying.